everyone. Please join me in welcoming Scott Jackman from Deveron. He will be discussing carbon basics in agriculture. All right, Scott, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you. Hello, my name is Scott Jackman from Deveron. We are an ag tech company that typically we help our clients use data to drive some type of production decision, whether it's through an increased yield or optimized inputs or a myriad of ways data can be used to drive production decisions. And one of the most exciting developments in the recent past, I'd say, been developing over the last 3 years, but really has caught on a lot of steam in the last year, is the emergence of carbon programs in agriculture. And these can seem quite complex, and seems like there's a lot going on with them. So I would like to take just a bit of time today to go over some basics, and I mean just very simple basics. If you're quite experienced in agriculture programs, you might not get as much out of this today, because this is the basics and more geared towards somebody who's trying to understand what's going on, and just trying to simplify from a grower and ag retail co-op perspective what the overarching plan of these carbon programs are. So to start out, what is a carbon program for agriculture? What's it do? And I'd say most agriculture related carbon sequestration programs, they're going to support some type of a greenhouse reduction program for another company, or it may be a larger company, but it's not necessarily the ag retail itself or the grower, but more realistically, it's some type of a larger external company, and that'd be like a FedEx or a Google, right? You know, they are, as you can imagine, FedEx consumes a lot of fuel, so they're looking to offset some of that fuel consumption. Or like a Google or a Microsoft, they use a lot of electricity, and so again, they're looking to offset some of that consumption. Or like a Bayer, you can imagine a company like Bayer, they both participate in agriculture, but in addition to that, they're a extremely large company, so they may be trying to offset some of their internal consumption. Or then if you look to like the Alaskan Permanent Fund or the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, both of those organizations, by their very core right now, are greenhouse gas producing or fossil fuel using companies, and so they're looking to offset some of that. The carbon markets right now are completely voluntary for the most part. There may be some local regulations, but at least in Canada or the US, there's no federal level larger overarching carbon reduction or carbon consumption reduction program. So they're voluntary right now, but we all do feel pressures coming from state legislatures and local legislatures about starting to reduce our consumption. And being how they are voluntary, the amazing thing is actually there are hundreds of millions of dollars of internal pledges going to internally reduce some greenhouse gas reductions. It doesn't really matter if somebody believes that carbon exchanges will work or not. The really amazing thing is 250 of the top 500 Fortune 500 companies have pledged some type of greenhouse gas reduction program, and they're trying to get to some reduced level over the next 10 to 20 years, and they're doing that voluntarily. So that's the really amazing thing is, even if it's hard to understand what the exchange may be in support of that, these companies are actually pledging to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So what is a greenhouse gas reduction plan? And I'm going to kind of build a story here to show you how agriculture supports this. A greenhouse gas reduction plan is some type of purposeful effort that a company takes to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and whether it's indirect emissions or their direct emissions. Like a company, again, like if we took an example of a Google, they consume a lot of electricity, so they're going to look to ways to reduce or offset their electricity consumption. Or a company that has long supply chains, they may look to some of their suppliers to help improve their supply chains to be less emitting. And growers or ag retails or co-ops typically don't have a greenhouse gas reduction plan. Typically, your participation in one of these programs is going to support another company's greenhouse reduction plan. So when you buy into, let's say, a Bayer or Corteva or or a regrow or a climate or any of those other programs, you're probably going to be helping another company participate in that. You might have your own greenhouse gas reduction plan if you're a large dairy producer or a large swine producer, but typically you're going to be part of some other company's plan. So from there, I mean, kind of basics are, what is a greenhouse gas and how does that affect agriculture? You can see here of the major types of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is about 80% of the greenhouse gases that are out there. And then we see that methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases make up the rest of it. And those vary in the amount of impact they have on the environment. Carbon dioxide is the largest one. However, it's the least value of a greenhouse gas. So everything is based on carbon dioxide, which has a value of 1. And then as you move up to the other greenhouse gases, they increase in their heat retaining capability. So as you move into like a methane, you're going to be around 300 for methane. But as you move up to the fluorinated gases, such as Freon, those are in the numbers of thousands. So like Freon has been pulled out of production in the 70s, but there's many other fluorinated gases that still have that number. And all of these greenhouse gas reduction plans work to reduce these numbers somehow. And so these are just one tool in reducing overarching production. So how does a carbon exchange and a greenhouse gas reduction plan work? Well, this is it in a nutshell. The markets are voluntary. As I said, there's no regulatory framework. But on the left-hand side here, you have what I'd call the sellers of excess. And so carbon sequestration efforts, which are efforts taken to store more carbon in the soil or increase the amount of vegetation that's stored, be that tree lands or wetlands or grasslands that set aside and store carbon, or reduce tillages and cover crops or increase soil health. All of those efforts are taken to increase the carbon that's stored in the soil. And then right along with that, many companies, even in agriculture, will have a greenhouse reduction plan, again, which is a plan taken to reduce their emissions. And that's optimizing nitrogen use, for example. Nitrogen itself, synthetic fertilizers, is about 300 times more of a greenhouse gas value than is basic carbon or CO2. So efforts to optimize your nitrogen or synthetic fertilizer uses has a 300 times more positive impact than any amount of storing of carbon in soil. So both are important. That gives you an example of the scale. And then think also, again, optimizing supply lines or reducing CFC emissions, right? Those are all increased value. And then that's the production side or the value side. And then on the demand side, you have those that are heavy consumers of electricity or fuel, or companies that use fossil fuel as a product line, or a greenhouse gas itself as a product line. They're trying to offset what they're emitting. And so somewhere they meet in the middle, which is a marketplace, an exchange, which is where we voluntarily have an exchange of money. And what is that value? Well, that value changes just like any market. And over time, as we go forward, that will become more and more regulated, and regulated from a sense of people starting to understand what is the real value of any of these efforts on the left versus what is demand of any of these things on the right. So what does Deveron see? So we believe, again, whether you think that like the carbon market themselves are enduring, or whether they can stand the test of time, the really amazing thing is all of these efforts are going to have a positive enduring value in a couple ways. The first thing is we are all seeing that the soil health initiatives are all growing out of this. And so optimized fertility use, optimized nitrogen use, even right now, we know it's at a record high, but enduring wise, we're going to be able to optimize our use of these things. And those are all greenhouse gas emitting things. And as we optimize them, we'll be more in line with what's best used. And then we can participate in the carbon markets from an agriculture perspective, which means just by the act of optimizing our inputs and our consumption, now we have the opportunity to participate in carbon markets, which that's where we all see now growers or ag retail or co-ops receiving monetary value per acre for carbon sequestration. And that's where that comes in, participating in the carbon markets. And then overall, our goal would be to avoid regulatory pressures, is if we as an industry can continue to show and demonstrate that we're doing the best we can to optimize the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we're having, we can continuously work to minimize regulatory pressures because we're doing it ourselves as an industry. And so these are all positive things that are going to come out of these emerging carbon markets. So who has agriculture carbon programs? This is not a complete snapshot, and this is based on research that we've been able to do via reporting on the internet. And so there may be more programs. Some of these programs may have changed, but this is just an example of some of the programs that are available for agriculture, and specifically growers, agri-retails, and co-ops that they can participate in. So for example, Bayer has a program in the US and Brazil right now. And as you move on down the line, there are many, many other companies that are developing programs focused on agriculture, from Bayer, Cargill, obviously very, very large companies to smaller companies, such as Locus Ag, Nori, or like a Continuum Ag, some of the smaller programs. And then everything from Yara, Trimble, Yara, fertility company, to Trimble, which is a hardware and software manufacturing company. There's a wide range of companies that are starting to participate in. I only offer this to say, look out into the market wherever you are and see, what is available for you to participate in, and dig into their programs and see if they make sense for you as within your operation. And again, this is not all of the programs. We're not endorsing any of these programs. I'm just using this as an example of ones that exist. But right in line with that, what is required to participate in one of those programs? So if you start at the top, to get into these programs, you need a greenhouse gas reduction plan. Now, you can either create one yourself and try to enter the market on your own, which is going to be challenging, or you can partner with an existing agriculture-focused program. And really what those all are creating is a greenhouse reduction plan that you will participate in and be a component of it. And you saw all those companies that I listed on the previous slide deck there. And what those all help you do is establish a baseline of what initially they help you establish a baseline. What are your soil carbon stocks? Document your farming practice, understand supply chains and your supply lines, right? That's what they're doing next, is like whenever you start to fill out all the paperwork, is you're helping establish the baseline. And then you're going to help change a farming practice in some way. And the purpose of that is to continuously get improvements. So you're going to try to adopt new greenhouse gas reduction practices, or if you're already doing something, to intensify existing efforts. And again, the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and those range across that spectrum that I talked to. And then finally, ultimately, right, receive money, participate in the upside for your efforts. And there's actually a couple of signs. Money is one thing, but increased soil health and actual reduction of greenhouse gases, those are all the value that you receive once you come out of these plans. Many of them require a contract, so dig into them, right? If you can imagine any greenhouse gas reduction effort isn't going to happen overnight, so there's going to be some length of time, and usually programs will ask you to they will spread some of the payment out over the length of that contract, and that's because the contract does take a bit of time to fulfill itself. So as we talk through that, if you say, hey, I want to jump in and create my own market, or jump into the market on my own, what do I need to do? Well, we've talked all about that, but these are really some of the components of the agriculture carbon market. You have buyers and sellers. We talked about that, and typically aggregators, which we're calling where people pool together sellers and create programs. And then you have a marketplace. That's that place of a free exchange of money. You got to have some type of data transfer system. You got to have some type of external validation. Otherwise, people could, in theory, raise the values above what they may traditionally be. You need some type of remote sensing capability, be it imagery, some way to scale out the requirements across your operation. We firmly believe that there's some level of soil sampling needs to accompany remote sensing to show us what that true value is in the soil that can then be extrapolated. And then right in line with that, you need a lab analysis and some testing methodologies. And then ultimately we end up with a farming practice, right? These are all the things that a greenhouse gas reduction plan for agriculture puts together into one plan. All these pieces and components come together. So what does Deveron do to support these emerging efforts? As I said in the beginning, we're an ag tech company that uses data to help our clients make production decisions, and carbon programs are one of those production decisions. About half of our company is scalable data collection across geographies. So we help many companies establish the baseline for their carbon programs. That you can imagine that'd be made up of soil sampling and some type of imagery process, probably, and then manage data movement and long-term storage of that data. So if you're going to sell carbon, there needs to be some type of record of what you sold, and that's what we talk about long-term storage. That record of that carbon that you sold needs to be retained as long as that contract is in existence. Otherwise, you lose track of what that value is that you were selling. And then obviously, as I said, in the beginning, before carbon's even come about, we help our clients optimize inputs. So right in line with that, we help optimize application of synthetic fertilizers or other greenhouse gas emission tools. And then last but not least, we help integrate with what's called ESG requirements, which is economic, social, and governments. But again, that's all in line with helping reduce pressures of regulatory requirements from companies by helping optimize our inputs. So with that, I'm going to stop and pause for questions and ask if anybody has any more questions. You can always reach out to any of us here, and this slide will be online, and I'll pause here just for a second.
So if anyone does have any questions, you can feel free to post them in either the Zoom chat or the feed loop chat on the right-hand side. Doesn't look like we have any so far.
It's all right. Did we answer all the questions then?
Must have. Okay, well, as you said, you are around for a bit. So if anyone is too shy, then they can always private message you or reach out directly through the Deveron booth.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for attending. The Deveron booth is here. We're online all week. We appreciate everything, and this is a pretty exciting time. As I said, the most exciting thing for us that we think will come out of this in long-term and enduring is improved soil health and those changes that are come on. That's pretty amazing for us. We got some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple just came in here. Your ideas of measuring baseline carbon stock?
So I'm not a soil scientist, but broadly, what we have seen is there are many companies, to include the U.S. and non-governmental organizations, to include USDA, the Canadians equivalent of the USDA, nonprofits who have worked in the area of greenhouse reduction for many years, and they've already started to establish parameters for measuring carbon stocks. And those are different. As you can imagine, measuring carbon stocks in tree land is different than measuring it in wetland, is different than measuring it in what we call grassland, or what is typically now row crop land. So those are all different. And something in Texas is going to be something different than Ontario, is going to be something different than in Western Canada. So the first thing is finding a protocol that fits within your region, whatever your region is. And now, once that's been established, you're typically going to have some type of soil sampling methodology that is combined with some type of imagery that helps you project where your soil sampling will be across all the fields. And typically for establishing baseline for carbon, there's a couple types of sampling that is done. The first is bulk density. Most scientists that we've worked with, or most labs that we've worked with, have said that some type of bulk density sampling is required to establish that. And then right in line with that, an associated with a soil organic carbon sample. Some protocols say to take that soil organic carbon number out of the bulk density, and some protocols say to take a separate soil organic carbon sample. So you're going to have one or two samples, and then that is spread across a field based on some type of statistics. Thank you.
Right, and we have Nicole at Lakeland College that is wondering what type of startup costs are associated with these programs.
So for an individual grower, the startup costs are typically going to be time involved for starting, because there's going to be some type of time required to say what are your current farming practices, and that's going to involve probably answering several questions, digging into records of your fields and what practices you've done over the past several years, and to establish a baseline. So initially, it's going to be time. Many of the programs incorporate some type of no-till or crop rotation or cover crop into that program. And so, as you can imagine, if you have never done no-till, then a startup cost would be the equipment for doing no-till. And if you've never done cover crop, startup costs would be, getting the equipment or finding a contractor that can help you start to apply cover crops. So those are the two types of startup costs. I would not recommend any individual grower or any individual small co-op try to create a whole program on their own. I would recommend that they participate in a program that is already had those massive startup costs already incurred.
And does a farmer signing a contract lock them into a production practice in the future, such as avoiding emergency tillage?
So there are many protocols, and I would say some of these programs do lock a producer into a contract, say for 5 years, and some of those would include cover crop or no-till, and some require both. So I'm going to say possibly, and you would want to look into the program that you're signing up for and maybe compare it with one or two others to see what fits your practice the best.
Okay, and just last week, Juicy visited a Germany farm, and their buyer paid €40 per ton. Is that pretty promising?
Yes, and that's one thing we all want within at least most everybody we talk with in the ag tech world that's helping these programs come along, is we want to ensure that our carbon credits, our money that we're paid per ton, remains high. And right, so we don't want to become what we call like junk bond rated. We want the world, those Fortune 500 companies that are paying to offset things, to highly value our carbon. And so as we can keep that number as high as possible, and we do that by following good practices, good practices for improvement, and good documentation and good storage of the data, then we can keep our value more at a high level like this.
And are farmers paid for carbon that is already in the soil, or just the difference between the initial soil carbon levels and a soil carbon sample taken later?
I hate to say yes, but yes. And again, you saw just from my quick list, there are, I had 20 or so companies in there, or companies that have programs, and those are all different programs. And those different programs range from, hey, manage your water flow, to managing, like I said, cover crops and no-till. And so it is a range, and it depends on where you live. on what programs are available. And I hate to be very vague with you on that, but I would not know exactly what's in your region. So yes to all the above.
And where do you see drones providing the biggest opportunity to support the greenhouse gas offset projects?
So drones are one tool in the toolbox of these programs. Drones are a remote sensor. They are a tool we use as a company, and there are many others that do. I'd say their value is always, well, anything with remote sensing, you are taking an assessment of what's in the ground remotely. And so generally we think that will be coupled with some type of soil sampling protocol that is scalable for whatever your program is. So if you can imagine, a 10,000 acre ranch that is doing some type of greenhouse gas reducing program, that might be applicable for drones to help remote sense what's going on with that 10,000 acres. However, if you have a program that has hundreds of thousand acres, drones might not be as useful to help extrapolate the values across what that is. So you might have to move to manned aircraft or satellite imagery for that. So useful, one tool, and it depends on the program you're going into.
Wonderful. Well, that looks like that's all the questions they have so far, Scott. Thank you so much. As noted earlier, if you do have additional questions, you can follow up directly with Scott or at the Deveron booth. They'll be here all week.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.